Evolution.org Hardcore 2.0 episode 146 is coming your way. Talking about staying motivated to train while on and off cycle by Para Pharma. So, Mobster and I, look, we're going to go over this is Mobster's topic. He's going to lead the show, but we're both going to, talk about this. We're going to talk about different strategies for staying motivated on and off cycle. We have several different topics, tips and tricks, setting new targets, how to stay motivated off cycle, shifting focus off cycle. We're going to talk about steroid cycles specifically that get you pumped up so that when you're on cycle, you could stay pumped and really kick ass on cycle. So it gives you a reason off cycle to stay motivated as well. So let's start with I can't stay motivated off of cycle. Mobster, what are your thoughts on this one?
Look, it's perfectly understandable that there will be, as Steve and I said in the pre-show, a difference between how you feel on testosterone, which we've talked about on other shows, literally the way that some people react and respond to being on anabolic steroids, their outlook on the world, and so on and so forth. And for those people, especially Steve, the sense of well-being, the ability to quote unquote kick ass, and as we did slightly tongue in cheek in one show, chasing pussy, as per a 23-year-old member of the forums was most enthusiastic about. But especially as per this topic, Steve, the difference between being on steroids, great products from Para Pharma included, obviously, and off steroids. And what do we mean by that? If I trained, which I do not, and we're going to get into the reasons for that, but if I trained exactly the same way, and I mean on the same program with the same sort of rep targets, and was trying to hit certain levels of weights that I could possibly lift, and this applies to anybody listening, there will be a fucking difference between being on and being off. All right. And I've got to be honest, Steve, I get a little bit frustrated when people say they've lost all their gains, and I will touch upon that as well, as we have done on some shows ages ago. But I do understand that I cannot be, in my own mind, Steve, and hopefully a few of the listeners, epically strong all the fucking time. I just can't. And if I was a bodybuilder, as the majority of our listeners are, looking to stay in shape and be muscular, the reality of the situation is, even without PEDs, you would hit certain peaks through the year at certain times of the year associated with the seasons and with the food that was available to you, assuming that we were slightly less primitive than we are right now. So certain fruits and vegetables, the quality of meat, the ease of obtaining those foods, and the ability to train in certain weathers. It's probably going to be harder if you was a primitive man to be crushing it in a freezing cold stone and wood gym versus it might be in a high-tech, sunny day, air-conditioned gym with the sun coming through the windows and so on and so forth. So the reality of the situation is, quite simply, that for some people, and I use this phrase, it's kind of crude, but it's a bit of a head fuck. And when we say motivated, we mean the difference between what you see in the mirror, Steve, what you see in the mirror, whether you're covered up in the winter time or whether you're, in shorts and a skinny vest in the summertime. All things being equal, one would hope, purely and simply on the basis of steroids being effective, that you should see a difference. That's the reason why we take steroids. If there was no difference, we wouldn't use them. There is difference. There has to be a difference. And even if, because it's a long-winded, boring argument, you could get to a certain particular level without steroids, but it just took longer, the reality of the situation is arguably there's a probably minimum of 5 and 10%. And that could be the difference between looking fucking awesome, being epically strong, being able to do certain particular things in the gym versus still being relatively strong, still being relatively muscular, but not quite that last 5 or 10%. And it's a psychological thing, Steve. It's like rich people losing a few bucks and having to go from driving a Ferrari or Maserati or a Lamborghini back to a normal car. As Steve has said on other shows, we lose a sense of perspective, and I'll touch upon that as well. Insofar as you've still got a modern car with modern technology that costs more than most people's salaries, and you are still, as Steve has said on another show, probably one of the 5% richest people on the planet compared to everybody else. And what sometimes happens when we lose the sense of perspective here, Steve, is that we're not quite as muscular, not quite as strong, and yet in reality, we're still in fucking better shape than 90% of the people walking around about us. So we're going to talk about that as well. So what do you think the reason why some people struggle to stay motivated, Steve, and expand a little bit my ideas? And then we'll get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, so I have a couple points on this one. First off, if you don't train naturally for many years, and I know I'll let Mobster talk more about this as well, but if you don't train naturally for a bunch of years, and as Mobster said, you go on steroids or you get a Lamborghini early in life, you're going to have a hard time going back to a Ford or a Honda, or a Toyota truck or any of that. So it's important to learn and love to train, whether on or off steroids. Because if you just been training for a few months or maybe a year or two, and then you hop on the gear, you're not going to want to train without the gear because anabolic steroids work. And they work in different ways on different people. But all in all, they give you the tools to break down barriers so you can improve. One of the ways they break down barriers is they help with protein synthesis. They help with muscle wasting. They allow you to keep more muscle and more strength than you otherwise wouldn't, even with the same training and same diet. They do things like bind to SHBG, which brings that takes down the wall, which is a evolutionary survival mechanism to keep you alive. Your body doesn't naturally want to keep a lot of muscle on its frame. It's not evolutionary advantageous to do that. You want some muscle, but you don't want the globs of muscles that you see professional bodybuilders do. That's why it's hilarious when professional bodybuilders or people who have a ton of muscle on their frame claim they're natural, or these guys on social media, these clowns on social media. The new thing now is that they'll claim, "Oh, I'm just on TRT." No, you're not. Your TRT is like a gram of gear a week. That's your fucking TRT. You're not on just 80 or 90 milligrams of testosterone a week, which is regular mild TRT. But they'll claim that because it makes them look like, wow, I really know what I'm doing. I'm really talented. You got to buy my supplement to look the way I am. So they do that to trick you into thinking that. So, yes, they're on steroids. That's why they're bald by the time they're 30. It's not an accident that they're bald by the time they're 30 because the steroids are shedding their head hair. So, steroids definitely work. And so if you start using them early, as Monster said, it's like giving a teenager a Lamborghini as their first car, or a car that goes 0 to 60 in 2 seconds or 3 seconds as your first car. You're gonna have a hard time going to a car that goes 0 to 60 in 7 or 8 seconds. It's gonna not feel the same. So I'll give you a perfect example. Have you ever driven like a truck, like let's say a U-Haul? You rent a U-Haul for a day. It feels really strange to drive that U-Haul, and you drive that U-Haul for a couple days during your move, and then you go back to driving your regular car where you're closer to the ground. It's faster. There's more speed, whatever. All right, but it feels a hell of a lot different. And you'll actually notice the difference, not necessarily when you drive in the truck, but when you go back to driving your regular car after a couple of days. You'll be like, wow, this feels weird, and that's how it is. When you're using steroids versus not using steroids, it can feel weird. But if you have experience training for many, many years and you use steroids, it could be like, wow, this is icing on the cake to what I've already been doing. But if you just hop on steroids to begin with, how the hell are you going to train without them? It's like you need it. It becomes a crutch to you. So that's really one of the things I'll say to you out there is don't hop on steroids early in your training life. I can't tell you how long to wait. Okay? It's your body, it's your choice. All right? You got to make the decision. But I'm telling you, if you hop on gear from day one, which a lot of people do, okay? A lot more people do than you think because a buddy of theirs is using steroids and they see their buddy in the gym getting bigger and more muscular at a rapid rate. And they're like, fuck it, what am I doing? I want to be like my buddy. I've been here for 3 weeks in the gym and I can't put on muscle and I can't put on strength and my buddy's kicking my ass. I want to do what he's doing. And of course, he's going to tell you about it because it's a cool thing, especially in America. It's cool to use steroids. I've seen a lot of these jerks on social media injecting themselves, showing off their steroids, trying, they made it look like, oh, it's a cool thing because it's not, it's kind of a gray area. It's not legal without a prescription. A lot of steroids are banned to be used entirely. So, hey, that's the cool thing to do to use steroids. So, yeah, of course you're going to want to use steroids. It's the cool thing to do. My friend's getting results. So, you're going to go and use steroids. Well, what are you going to do when you come off steroids? It's not going to feel, it's like the truck, the U-Haul example. It's going to feel completely different when you come off. If you go from driving a U-Haul to driving a little car, you might feel like, wow, I don't feel safe in this little car. But you're driving that big U-Haul, you're like, I feel safe. I almost feel bad for other drivers because I'm worried if I hit them, I'm going to damage fuck their shit up. But when I'm driving my car, I might not feel as safe because there's going to be other cars that are bigger than me. Those semis. You ever go on the highway? You're trying to pass those semis. You're like, man, I'm a little scared. This semi might not see me. He might run me off the road. It's the same thing. So you got to just keep that. So that's my tip right there, mobster, is don't start using steroids too early in your lifting life. That would make a
Absolutely,
difference. Go
Steve.
ahead. Mhm.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, look, I've literally, I think I told this story before relating to a teenager of all people asking me about Anadrol. And you and I have talked about Anadrol, you didn't Para Pharma, and we said, how some people, if they respond well to Anadrol, can blow the fuck up. It's just like, it's one of those, if you like Anadrol, if your body likes Anadrol, I've heard of people gaining 20 pounds. And I told this story before about he had to be late teens, very early 20s. And I would be late 30s, early 40s when this conversation was taking place. And I was warming up because it was only a short walk from my house by walking on the treadmill. And the gym that I was training had two treadmills. So we walk in next to each other. And he says, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah, sure. And it was relating to whether or not I use steroids. I said, yes. But I waited till I was 37 and so on and so forth. Oh, no, sorry. He asked about Anadrol. He asked specifically about Anadrol. And I said, can I ask you a question? And he says, yes. I said, how long have you actually been training? He said, 6 weeks. I says, man, I waited 22 fucking years from age 15 to age 37 before I used steroids. And you've been training 6 weeks and you're asking me about steroids. Right. So part of the issue here, Steve, apart from, as Steve says quite correctly, if you want those gains, if you are jealous of your body, if you are obsessed with the idea of being bigger, if it's sort of, you want to kick bullies' asses, etc., etc., there's a mental thing that says, why should I wait? I want to be bigger tomorrow. I want to be more muscular tomorrow. I want to be stronger tomorrow. I want to cook the bully's ass. I want to get the girls. Why the fuck should I wait? And I would argue about things like you haven't learned how to train properly because why the fuck would you? It's only been a few minutes, 6 weeks, whatever, in this example. Almost certainly you couldn't show someone else how to train. So you don't know how to train properly yourself. You're probably not eating properly. Your routine's probably all over the place. You're copying something your buddy does, which might not be relative to you, and so on, right? So we almost talk about it like going to school. You haven't earned your stripes. And it's just about things like holding on to muscle tissue afterwards. It's just about being able to train properly to get the most out of your stack and so on and so forth, Steve. So absolutely, I would suggest that in my mind is an age, but that's more to do with physical maturity. But equally, I wouldn't care if you were 50 years old and you'd only been training for a few weeks. I would want you to go out and get your stripes. I'd want you to read books on nutrition. I'd want you to work with a PT so you know how to do exercises properly, and so on and so forth, just to get the most bang for your buck. And that's regardless of your age. So there's absolutely an argument to be made for holding fire for a little while just to get the basics down properly, just to understand some of the processes involved. So if you spend $1,000, Steve, I want you to get $999 worth out of your stack. What I don't want you to do is train like a pussy, eat like a church mouse, and not get all your gains, not get the most you possibly could, and get $100 worth out of the steroids that you spent $1,000 on, purely simply because you could have had better gains, you could have had better results. So there's definitely an argument to be made for that. I think there's another argument, Steve, and I've seen this before, and it ties into some of the tips and tricks I'm going to talk about in a little while. And it's quite simply this. I've seen people in the past, and we've talked about this on shows, and I'll even use that $1,000 stack analogy again, where because you've purely and simply spent $1,000 getting your anabolic steroids, to get in your ancillaries, get in all the other aspects that you might need post-cycle as well. And again, all of this available from Para Pharma. And you've got it together. You've finally worked. Yes, it's $1,000 stack. I'm going to run it for 8 to 12 weeks. The gains are going to be amazing. And I'm with you right there. Steve's with you right there. But the problem that I've seen sometimes, Steve, is that the only time they train properly, pushing the envelope, really getting the muscles to work, squeezing the contractions, is when they're on a stack. The only time that the nutrition is on point, if they have a log, the food is on point. It's all prepped. There's chicken breast and rice and rice cookers and seasoned and this, that, and all the things they're supposed to be doing, but they're only done when you're on cycle. And I'd actually argue, Steve, in some ways, it is as important that you are that focused off stacks, off cycle, because why is your body going to want to retain the muscle tissue that you've just spent 8 to 12 weeks getting? Why is it going to maintain the condition or something close to the condition that you managed to get into if you're still not putting the work in the gym, if you're still not doing your cardio, if you're still not doing fasted cardio at such a time of the morning? How easy is it to get into the, oh, I won't go to the gym today because there's a great movie on, or it's raining, I don't want to do my cardio, or there's a thing. We literally just replied to a couple of posts on the forums about it this morning where someone had gone out and it'd been a while since they went out. So they went out and deliberately got drunk and had a hell of a hangover. They're really grinding, Steve. They're really putting it in the gym. The food's amazing, etc., etc. But they've kind of almost put themselves back for 4 or 5 days by having to recover from the hangover and so on and so forth. And we're like, you said specifically you can go out and enjoy yourself. So this is what we see sometimes, where people have a certain dedication and a certain focus on steroids because they've invested in a stack, because they've laid out $1,000 typical value for a stack overall, Steve, including PCT. It's like they want to get their money's worth. And arguably, the best bodybuilders in the world, and especially not necessarily the giants, but the ones that struggle to stay in condition, even off cycle or cruising or whatever that the top professionals are doing, still requires you to eat a certain level of cleanliness. Now, you do not, arguably, need to stay in tip-top competition shape. And this is where we get into the shifting of focus, the realizing there's different ways of doing things. And I'll use myself as an example, and I'll bring Steve back in for this as well. Right? So I know I'm on cycle right now. I'm on a power/bulk cycle right this minute. And hopefully, if I just limit it to 8 weeks, I'm in and on about taking it to 10 weeks, I should be looking on one of my lifts, a Hatfield squat, well in excess of 900 pounds. I'm looking as a minimal target, Steve, of probably around 930, 940 pounds for a single rep. There might be, and it's kind of half at the back of my mind, and it might even just make the 940 easier, there might be a 455 kilo, 1,000 pound squat in there. If I'm in the mood, if everything goes right, if I run it for 10 weeks, I'm kind of seeing if I can get that close to that kind of crazy, fucked up kind of weight. But the reality is, let's assume that I'm incredibly lucky, the stars align, everything goes well, and I hit some stupidly heavy number. Can I do 930, 940 or 1,000 off cycle? Absolutely fucking not. I can still do, if I absolutely had to, something stupid like the late 700s, early 800 pounds. But that's somewhere between 100 and 200 pound difference, Steve. It just is. It's stupidly heavy, which I'm going to touch upon in a minute, but it's not that stupidly heavy. So one of the tricks that I've done is, number one, accept that I will not be able to do ridiculous numbers, and literally shift focus in my training. What do I mean by that? So instead of training towards a one rep max, a single repetition with some ridiculous weight. The last time I did this, Steve, I think my single one rep max was 905 pounds. And then the moment the cycle finished, and there was just a little week or two for the Sus and Decker to leave my system, that's what I did last time, same as this time. Um, I tried to see if I could do 25, 26 repetitions, whatever the fuck it was, with 500 pounds. I got to 18 reps. So I was literally 400 pounds, 400 plus pounds less. But I shifted focus. Same exercise, but deliberately trying to set a repetition target with a weight that Tom Platts, Fred Hadfield, and others have done back in the day. A few modern powerlifters have tried, and I've seen the fails are epic. I only know of one or two people that have been close to that number or better. It is stupidly hard on the cardio condition, but it's not 900 pounds. It's not over 900 pounds. And so it enabled me not to struggle mentally with the focus of being able to do one thing on cycle versus doing something off cycle, which is still ridiculously hard, but not that kind of repetition, one rep, huge weight, sub-maximal, etc., etc., etc. Just a completely different challenge in terms of the repetition range of volume and so on. So, for example, as a bodybuilder, I might change the exercises. If I do easy bar curls, why don't I do a whole 8 or 12 week training cycle of peak my biceps, so concentration curls and certain kinds of cable curls. So instead of working the mass, I might work on the shape. Instead of working on bulk, I might work on detail, and literally shifting my focus around. Part of the problem, which Steve actually touched upon a little bit as well, is the social media aspect. And social media, like the magazines, as you and I said in a show recently, Steve, gives the illusion of certain people being in amazing shape all the fucking time. And the reality is they're not. Photographs can be taken out of context. Is it summer in the background of that picture? That was probably taken in the spring, but he's presenting the picture to you in the autumn. So naturally, there's 6 months difference between you not having seen that photograph, but then realizing it's actually from earlier in the year. It's not yesterday. It's not the day before. It's a 6-month-old photograph, giving the illusion that this person is in this shape all year round. So there's that aspect to it. I think there's another thing, Steve, in terms of, and let me bring you back in for a second because I've got a thought I want to recapture again. So what do you think about shifting focus, Steve?
Look, you've got to accept that no matter what your goals are, whether you're like Mobster and you're a strength trainer, whether you're a bodybuilder, you're not going to be as strong and muscular when you come off, and that is okay. You're not going to be able to improve in a linear fashion because that isn't the way our bodies work. So if you're not going to accept that, then we go back to the title of this episode, which is staying motivated. How the fuck are you going to stay motivated if you're not willing to accept that? You're not willing to, and we're going to talk about tips and tricks in the next segment. But look, I think when it comes to powerlifting, I think it's more, black and white because Mobster's going to kind of go over his strategies for powerlifting. When it comes to bodybuilding, it isn't. When it comes to bodybuilding, it's a mind fuck. You're looking in the mirror, you're not as hard, you're not as dry because you're not taking these steroids. And we're going to talk about steroids as well that will really give you a different look on cycle versus off cycle. And we're talking about some steroids that are more keepable gains. But look, if you are going to have that mentality that you're just going to improve in a linear fashion forever, it's just not going to work. There are things that happen in life. There's illnesses. We have people doing logs right now on the forum. How many people have illnesses? You have deaths in the family. How many people have we had with deaths in the family? We've got injuries, people who get injuries, some
Yep.
really serious injuries we've seen.
Yep.
And
Dealing with injuries post surgery right now, Steve, right now.
we're dealing with people who have nagging injuries. My elbows, my hips, my knees. And if if let's say you're doing a lot of cardio, a lot of running, it would be something like plantar fasciitis. We've had that come up every now and then. Ankle issues, hip, all kinds of things. Wrist injuries are common. Nerve issues are common. Shoulder injuries are common. I can go through the list. And whenever you get these things come up, it could be a small injury or a big injury. But when you get these things come up, of course, you're going to take a step back. So if you're not willing to do that, when you come off cycle, it's a huge mind fuck. Where like, wow, I just don't look as good as I did a month ago when I was on gear. But I'm here to tell you that it's okay. And look, let me finish out this thought with this before I bring in Monster. Look, pro athletes in any sport, whether it's bodybuilding, especially with bodybuilding, because bodybuilding, um, we have so many videos of bodybuilders. They literally have to be public about their feelings and how they feel. It's not like other sports where they make plenty of money and then they can just retire in the sunset and they don't have to do videos. But a lot of these professional bodybuilders who are no longer professional bodybuilders, they have to still do videos because they literally have no education, no skills, nothing that they can fall back on and make a living on except going on and making YouTube videos and being on Instagram. So we see this with them. They go into a depression and I can tell who they are. I'm pretty sure Mobster can. You guys might not be able to, but I can definitely tell who some of these guys are. You can tell by their, the posts they make and all this stuff. They are in a depression because they got old and they're forced into retirement and this is the first time in their lives that they haven't been the best bodybuilder in the gym. They haven't been the guy where everybody crowds around and watches them lift 450 pounds and is like, wow, this guy's amazing. In any sport, soccer, football, hockey, whatever, they're no longer, they get cut. They have to, they don't get their contracts renewed. They're forced into retirement and it sucks. And they have to accept that. And some athletes accept it and some don't. And some end up going bankrupt and some end up going into depression and some even end up committing suicide, and it's sad. And we see this a lot, it's more pronounced in like MMA and wrestling because those two sports are so fucking brutal on the body and the brain that these guys end up basically being hooked on painkillers the rest of their life. And we see that a lot
Yeah.
with all these MMA fighters who
Steve,
say,
we used to have
yeah,
a huge problem here with soccer. It's less so now because some of them have got decent financial advice, and of course they're getting paid crazy wages. But it used to be the case that you would be probably, arguably, one of the best footballers, soccer players in the country, and at some point you've either had a medal of the Queen or the King or whoever, and you've played for your country. Maybe you've even sort of won some fantastic international games. Never mind your actual side that you played for. And then when you come to the end of your career, which was typically 30, 35 years of age, very few were able to turn that career into something in media, sports reporting, sports commentary. That's going to be a fraction of the available retired football players, soccer players. So what do? Too many alcoholics, too many drug things, too many shagging silly discotheques, etc., etc., etc. Silly stories for the Sunday papers and so on and so forth. A few of them manage to have other businesses or other
yeah.
aspects to their life.
Well, it's
So
funny
let me,
because
yeah,
yeah, the women no longer flock to you anymore. They don't want a 45 or
yeah,
50 year
exactly.
old. They want the
We had that.
25 year old, 30-year-old. It's the
Yeah,
same thing in steroids. You might notice when you're
it's
on.
worse, man. It's worse because sometimes when I lived in Gloucester, Steve, if the local Gloucester rugby team had done well and they went to a club in town afterwards to celebrate, the guys were buying them drinks and the girls were interested. But if they'd lost, they were getting fuck all. They were trying not to have
But I'm
fights in
talking
town.
about, but I'm
That,
talking about
that,
with what we do because when you're
yeah,
on cycle, you'll feel like the women are flocking to you or the guys are
yes,
flocking to you because they can
yes,
sense and smell those
yes,
pheromones coming off of you, those hormones coming off of you, and when you come
especially in
off,
young.
you won't notice that as much. You won't notice that you won't have that glow as
Yeah,
much. So you may notice that. So that's a mind fuck in its own way. So you've got to. So really, in that situation, and I'll kind of touch back on that, and we'll move on to tips and tricks and setting new targets because I know you have a lot
yes,
to talk. But in that sense, why aren't you attractive off cycle? Why do you need steroids to be attractive? Why not
Yeah,
become more attractive off cycle?
or
Become
more
more.
confident or more self-aware. I
Why
mean, look,
why are you not, why do you have to use steroids to be
to feel,
confident?
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
got to build your confidence when you're
That
off.
might even be an argument to be made, Steve, that that's how it started, but it shouldn't be the case after a little while. Look, let me
So that's why
remind you this.
people want to use steroids because they literally only feel confident when they're on them. They only feel
Mm-hmm.
like an alpha when they're on them. When they come off, they feel low confident. They got their head down all the time, whatever. So you got to
Well,
work
this
on
is what I mean
yourself.
again about shifting focus. But let me remind the listeners, look, you need to be reminded, and I think it's a kind of motivational suggestion. You are it the percentage of the population that works out in both our countries, in America and the United Kingdom, is roughly 10% that do regular exercise. The percentage that are arguably listening to this show, the demographic that listens to the show, is in 5%. Those of you that are muscular and in shape, off cycle, is only 1 to 2% of the whole population of the country we live in. So it shouldn't be too much of a head fuck that you are not in the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, i.e., 8% body fat, and so on and so forth. You are still in better shape. You are still more muscular. You are still stronger than most people you know. So you need to have that as a sort of the worst I look is still better than most people. The weakest I get is still better than most people, and that's off cycle. And if you remind yourself of that, that's a point there. The other thing is, and this is I told my injury recovery story before, Steve, but I use part of that story here. Whatever condition you've dropped back to, and it won't be as dramatic as your head thinks it is. And regardless of how weak you get, and again, it won't be quite as dramatic as perhaps your ego is allowing for, it's temporary. When the 16-week recovery from the lower back injury thing was for me, and it was super painful, Steve, 8 weeks sleeping on the floor, 16, 17 hours a day in bed, everything took forever to recover from, to do, just washing up and going to the toilet and having a shower. All these things took forever. My saving grace was that I knew it wasn't a permanent disablement. It was a temporary blip. And although it was 16 weeks and nearly 4 months of my life, that's out of 60 something years to date. So that's a fraction, a quarter of a third of the year. So what's that? 180th of my life, a fraction. And the idea that you're out of condition or not as muscular or not as strong is a temporary thing. So even though it's a bit of a head fuck, a little bit demotivated, it's only demotivating for a short period of time. One of the things, and this is one of the tricks, and I talk about shifting focus. One of the things you notice with professional bodybuilders is that you have to be incredibly selfish, arguably any top athlete in any profession, in order to become a top athlete in that profession. And one of the things that a lot of competitive athletes, including top bodybuilders and including people that have been in crazy shape, do is it is a little bit selfish to be doing the cardio, to be eating certain specific foods when you're not relaxing with the family, and so on and so forth. One of the things I do right now, Steve, is my hobby outside of weightlifting, outside of doing these shows, is literally getting walks in nature, taking pictures of wildlife. It's such a switch from what I normally do. If you see me in a gym muttering away, lifting crazy weights, you can also see me sort of feeding fucking robins and talking to the ducks and stuff, Steve, and taking nice nature pictures, which occasionally get published, that kind of shit. And you wouldn't see the two things. You wouldn't imagine the two things go together. What you will sometimes see with athletes is family time. They suddenly, hang on, my partner's been really supportive. I need to show them that I'm grateful for their support. And the kids haven't seen me. Sometimes this happens with work as well, Stephen. We need to remind ourselves that there are other things outside of what we do. And just easing off the gas pedal, off steroids, and reminding loved ones that they are loved, doing things that are completely different from what you do in the gym, and being super focused, but focusing on something else completely, i.e., family, friends, wildlife, whatever, enables you to not sort of become too upset with that crazy, crazy feeling, that Superman type sensation, that alpha male type sensation that Steve talked about. So, what about you, Steve, in terms of what tricks have you got for our listeners that will enable them to sort of not quite be overwhelmed by the fact that they don't look as good as they used to before?
So I always tell people this because people come on the forum, they complain. They're well, I gained this much on cycle, and I only kept this much, and I only kept this much strength and all this stuff. Look, if you're running some of these steroids, and we're going to talk about them in the next segment. Some of these steroids, like tren, there's a boomerang effect because you're going to go on tren. Some of you are going to go on tren, and you're going to have this amazing recomposition effect where you lose body fat and gain muscle and gain strength at the same time, and you're amazed by it. Well, what do you think happens when you come off? It's the opposite. You'll lose strength just as rapidly, you'll lose muscle just as rapidly, and in a lot of cases you'll gain back a lot of body fat, because it changes the way your body metabolizes food. It changes a lot of things that goes on in your body. Now, now some of you will have different effects with different steroids. So it's important to just accept that. Accept that that's normal, because we're not going to just keep improving, as I said in the last segment, in a linear fashion. So until you do, you're going to continue to mind fuck yourself. I've seen so many guys where I can literally tell they're on gear, because when they're on gear, their muscles look full. They're in the gym constantly. I see them when I arrive at the gym. I see them when I leave the gym. And then off cycle, I see them in there maybe for like half as much time, and they're spending the whole time socializing, or they're on their phone. So they don't take it serious when they're off steroids versus on steroids. And it's important to take it serious when you walk into the gym. That's your safe space. That's like going to church. You zip it. You walk in there, you zip it. If you go into church and you're talking and you're socializing, the priest will probably come up to you, or the preacher or whatever will come up to you, and they'll be like, "This is a place for worship. You got to leave." Okay? And I saw this happen when I was dealing with a death of a loved one, where I had to go to church a couple times. And I saw that happen. And I was like, wow, this is how it should be. You know, as much as that's rude that he said that, that should be the same way in the gym. You walk in the gym, you handle your business, you leave. You want to fucking socialize? You can talk to me outside. Talk to me outside when we leave. But the gym, that's not the right place. This is why I don't like training at a lot of these gyms, because you got to deal with assholes who fuck with your focus and do this stuff. So it might be a situation where your gym isn't conducive to what you're looking for. You might want to do a home gym. You might want to go to a private gym like I do. I go to a private gym where I pay every month, and it includes a gym membership, and it includes a bunch of other stuff. And it's a lot less people, and there's rarely anyone there because it's so expensive, but I don't have to deal with distractions. So you got to ask yourself, are you distracted off cycle? Is something causing you to be distracted? That's step one. Step two is to set goals. And I know Mobster wants to go over some strength, but I'm gonna tell you with bodybuilding. In bodybuilding, instead of setting weekly goals or day by day goals, set year over year goals, 5 year goals, 10-year goals, 12-year goals, 3-year goals, like that. Because it's not about, well, I look like this after a 12-week cycle, and then I look like this after 4 weeks of PCT and being off cycle. You're just going to fuck with your brain. You should do year over year goals. This is why logs are important. And we see multiple guys and gals on the forum doing logs. And the nice thing about the logs is you can see where you were before, because you may not understand where you are like that. You look at yourself every day in the mirror. You're not going to notice the changes. But if you do a log and you log your pictures, and you can always be anonymous by blocking your face, you can see where you are year over year, or after the course of 2 years, or after the course of 3 years. And that's where you want to see the improvements. Are you improving over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? That's what you want to see. So you don't want to worry about, am I improving over the course of 3 or 4 months? That's not going to be as important. So that's what you have to do. Set year over year goals. And that would make a huge difference because you're not just going to be able to stay on steroids, for months and months and months and months and not have consequences. And in the end, it can end up being a negative situation. Mobster?
Yeah, let me give you one very, very simple example that I've used. And in fact, I recently did this, Steve. So right now I'm working up to with a triple ply slingshot, probably at the end of the month. In fact, with the gym owner support, somewhere close to 700 pounds using what's called an F8 triple ply slingshot. This is not the same as doing it raw or just with sleeves or whatever else. So even that's less of a head fuck, Steve, because I know it's not the same. But let me give you an example. Prior to this recent bulk and prior to working up to with sleeves and with a single ply sleeve shot, I did a, I think, 8-week training cycle where I was just using one of the ISO lever bench machines and worked up to around 100 kilos, 220 pounds a side for a few repetitions. Ugly, hard, whatever, because I've only been doing it for 8 weeks. One of my ideas for the future, quite possibly at the end of this training cycle, and that will, of course, mean I will be coming off of the stack and returning to TRT levels, might be dumbbell bench. I haven't done dumbbell bench for fucking years, and I mean years. I can remember, I think, the last time I'd done it. I don't think I've done it since I've been here in Wales. So 12, 13 years, Steve. And I know that the first few sessions is going to be horrendously difficult because how much harder it is to stabilize dumbbells. But it won't be a head fuck. And it won't be a head fuck or demotivate purely and simply because my expectations are not going to be 150 or 180 or even the gym biggest dumbbells, 198-pound dumbbells. It's going to be less because it will be less because I'm not used to it. But it certainly won't be me looking to do a triple ply 600 or 700-pound bench press and then coming off of PEDs or going back to TRT and not being able to use that, unrack the fucking weight, never mind bench press it, because how much of a head fuck would that be? So I literally will choose, as I said earlier on, to do completely different volumes, high repetition instead of maximal weights. I would deliberately pick exercises I haven't done for a very long time. I might do, for example, on pull down, Steve, I can do the whole stack pretty much on a cycle any day, but I will do less reps versus more reps. There's things, for example, I think the heavy dumbbells that we've got, the 198 pounds, let's call them 200 pounds. It's hard, but I can do a decent number of reps off cycle. But on cycle, I'm looking in the high teens or mid to high teens for repetitions. But it's not head fuck because I can still pick them up and do a few brutal heavy reps off cycle. So I'm still strong enough, and perhaps arguably, Steve, if they had heavier dumbbells, I'd work up to the heavier dumbbells on cycle and do the quote unquote lighter dumbbells off cycle. So in that particular way, and by doing stuff like that, I might do, for example, Steve, machine curls versus really heavy hammer curls or alternate curls and working on the contraction as I would do on cycle, as I am right now, and then switch over to the bicep tricep machine for off cycle. And these kind of things enable you to psychologically deal with the simple fact that you might be as muscular or as strong or as lean or whatever else. And like I said, there's a lot of positives out there. You're still in that small percentile, as I said. You can use the time in another particular way. I mean, look, Steve, even just getting to the goddamn gym on a regular basis and being that kind of consistent, it still puts you ahead of everybody else. And it still means that your buddy, your pal down the road, people in other gyms who aren't as consistent, if you will lose more. Those that go crazy on their diets off cycle will lose more. But you, the listener to this show, because you're more consistent, because you're still plugging away, because you've shifted your focus a little tiny bit, like we just talked about, will still maintain muscle above and beyond those people that are lazy or inconsistent or just stopped eating decently clean food, just went to the ready meals, went to the takeouts, and so on and so forth. You'll still be ahead of the game. And no matter how bad you feel, no matter how awful, and I use that word very loosely here, you think you look in the mirror, the Joe up the road who's lazy as fuck and sloppy with the diet, etc., looks way worse than you do. You can take a certain level of satisfaction out of the fact that no matter how bad you think you look, you're still goddamn better than most people. And I think that's a part of a problem. Even for me, Steve, no bigger and strong as I might be, I can go on the internet and see bigger, stronger people quite easily. Everybody can. And it's enough sometimes to recognize that you are still in that percentage. You are still there. I don't get to stand next to people often enough in the gym that are muscular, but weigh half what I weigh, or nearly half what I weigh. And on the odd occasion, I will get a glimpse of someone like that and go, listen, he looks really, really good. But look how much fucking bigger I am. And I've literally had, they're really good buddies. So it's really nice when people say these kind of things. I might not necessarily be going in there to have some sort of barbaric, crazy, psycho motherfucker workout. And then someone will come up to me and go, you inspire me. I love seeing you fucking move that way. You go, thank you very much. Those little things, all that kind of stuff helps, that kind of feedback. So that's important. Something that Steve touched upon, and we're going to talk about stacks and cycles here, Steve. And it did occur to me, the more potent a steroid is, the more anabolic, the more of an effect on your body. And Steve specifically mentioned tren, and I mentioned anadrol earlier on, and how it can be incredibly dramatic at times. The more you will see a difference. One of my buddies earlier on said, if only we could get you to do 2 grams and some tren, how much fucking crazy stronger would you be? I sent him some pictures earlier just to G him up because he had his head up his ass. And I said, this is if I was squatting today. This has just arrived in a post, etc., etc., etc. If we could get you on 2 grams and tren, Steve, you'd be a fucking monster. You'd be doing epic shit. I said, I'd probably have nosebleeds, but who the fuck knows? We was having a bit of banter, Steve. But it was that sort of stuff. So, I mean, we've talked about this on other shows, and I'll use the anadrol example. We can talk about tren as well, and we can talk about milder, more capable gains, and these are capable off cycle as well, which we're going to talk about. But just use the anadrol example. If you would respond incredibly well, like I suggested earlier in the show, and you was able to put on cycle, or at the end of the cycle, you stepped on the scale, and from the start of the cycle to the end of the cycle, you gained a huge 20 pounds, as a few, it is a few, occasionally do. Just how much of those 20 pounds is going to stick and stay? I would argue, Steve, that they would be incredibly lucky if they kept at 10 to 12 pounds. I'd actually say gaining too much and blowing the fuck up and maybe even having veins popping and kind of looking super bulky, etc., would be great in terms of how you'd feel and how you perceive yourself, etc., assuming you didn't have a massive moon face and it wasn't a water retention. But if you kept a third, I think you'd be doing incredibly well. Versus, for example, and we'll talk about some PDs now as well, Steve, how many times I said, using, for example, Para Pharma's Anavar 50, which I'm looking at on the screen as I do this show, how capable those gains are for the average user. And 4 to 8 weeks of Anavar 50, because 50 milligrams, you could half a pill in the morning, half a pill at night, for 4 to 8 weeks, for me, typically meant something like 5 pounds on cycle. Now, I'm going to keep 60, 70% of that if I'm a bodybuilder. And doing that repeatedly through the year, especially with something mild like Anavar, means that my gains are more capable and I can do more cycles. If, for example, my cycles focused around tren, I'd argue, especially at my body weight and body fat, the side effects would be so goddamn horrendous I probably wouldn't want to finish a cycle. The results, if I could finish a cycle, would be fabulous. But I suspect, as Steve said, the bounce back afterwards would be horrendous. So when Steve and I talk about milder stacks, when we're not trying to throw you under the bus with 3, 4, 5 grams, and when we talk about Para Pharma products used properly, the more capable gains are better. It's good, it's fun, I would argue, for some users to experiment with a mega cycle, Steve, and the more anabolic and the more androgenic drugs. But you and I talk about more capable gains, more sensible cycles, safer cycles insofar as anabolic
Yeah,
safer. And it's less of a head fuck. It's less demotivated. So talk about something like that, Steve.
Yeah, one of the things a lot of people recommend is using testosterone as a first cycle, which I always like have to shake my head because when you use testosterone as a first cycle, a lot of your gains are going to be water weight because testosterone at moderate doses aromatizes the estrogen very heavily. Same thing with Dianabol. So it really goes against what we're trying to say on this podcast. Now, some of you are okay with that. You don't mind the big water retention. You're fine with it, but you're not going to keep water when you come off because that effect where it's aromatizing into estrogen causing the water weight is going to go away when you come off. So you'll blow up when you're on and you'll pop like a balloon when you come off. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, when it comes to what do you want to use for keepable gains, Para Pharma Primo, Para Pharma Equipoise. These are great options. Very mild compounds, very easy to use. You can use 400 to 500 milligrams a week, and you can stack some testosterone with them, but not a lot. And you'll get very slow, very good quality gains that are more keepable. If you can put on 4 or 5 pounds on a cycle over the course of 12 weeks, you can keep at least half of that, no problem. But if you're going to go on tren or testosterone, parapharma tren, parapharma testosterone, parapharma dianabol, as we touched on, and you put on 10, 15, 20 pounds or more, even I've seen people put on, you really think you're going to keep that? No, because it's not actual muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is slow to build. So it's not about, yeah, I put on this much weight. It's about how much am I keeping. So on tren, I've seen people put on 10, 12 pounds on tren, and when they come off, they lose it all because it's such a huge boomerang effect, the way it affects your metabolism and everything. So some people want that. So if you don't mind having that effect and it's not going to fuck with your mind, then try it out. But wait to use tren after 5 or 6 cycles. Other steroids, how about DECA and testosterone together? Slow quality gains. The testosterone, you want to run it low, you want to run the DECA high. DECA is a testosterone derivative, which was tweaked to not cause as much water retention and to be more mild. So you're going to get slow quality gains with DECA. I can't tell you a better steroid over the years since the 90s that guys have been using, including me, where you use it for 12 weeks and you have a really good chance of keeping a lot of those gains as long as you keep on training, you keep on eating the way you should. And DECA is a great one for that. So if you really want to put on good quality mass and you want to get bigger, DECA, the Parapharma DECA might be the option. Now you can also use the Parapharma NPP, which is nandrolone phenylpropionate, which is short-acting nandrolone versus the long-acting nandrolone, which is DECA. So that's also another option. Winstrol and Masteron. These two are options that will dry you out and harden you up like crazy. But what do you think's going to happen when you come off? You're going to lose that effects. So you want to keep that in mind. So if you're going to use these, treat them like cosmetic steroids and use them ahead of a vacation, ahead of a
Yes,
contest, something like
yes.
that, because it's going to be a mind fuck to get really, really hard. You might go from having a 6 pack down to a 2 pack when you come off of these. So you're gonna be like, well, I'm so happy I have a 6 pack. The first time in my life I have a 6 pack, and then after you come off a few weeks later, once they're out of your system, you go back to having a 2 pack. You're like, what the hell happened? Well, the hardness and the drying out went away. So of course you're gonna lose those abs in the process.
I've used the Cut Stack 150 guys, and one of the arguments which was actually useful in terms of being able to deal with the on versus off effects. I've described using Parapharma's Cut Stack 150, and I've said many times when we talked about this, Steve, that I went from 327 to 320 and then back up. I recomped because I never used any product that had training before, which Cut Stack 150 has. But my belt size, my belt notches, I went down 2 belt notches and I retained the difference. Although there was a 7 pound difference in my body weight, I retained the smaller waist, the tighter waist. In fact, ironically, I kept it even when I did the immediate bulk right afterwards. Now, I was only running this product 3 times a week, so a combined total of all 3 PEDs, which is in the cut stack, of 450 milligrams. Sorry, yeah, 450 milligrams, Steve, 3 mil. Right, that is fuck all. Let's be honest. In terms of dosaging, slightly more annoying for me having to do 3 injections a week because of the shorter esters, but not the worst thing ever, Steve. No issues with PIP. And again, I only run this for 4 weeks, right? So look at it this way, guys. If I'd have gone triple, if I'd have gone 450 per injection, so 3 mil, 3 times a week. So what's that, Steve? 1,350 milligrams instead of 450 milligrams. The change, the recomposition, the belt size dropping, etc., would have been more dramatic. But my ability to deal with the side effects would have been that much harder. And I suspect the bounce back afterwards would have been that little bit more difference. I mean, look, guys, arguably, Steve, running the cut stack 150, my personal experience was absolutely fucking amazing. Keeping that, but I mean, I still haven't adjusted my weightlifting belt. It's a little bit tighter now, but I still haven't adjusted it. And I've used Para Pharma products and loved them. So, what do you think on that, Steve? Because I know that you use, but when we talk about these kind of things, you've used them as well.
Yeah, I'll let you finish out the podcast. Yeah, but I've definitely used Para Pharma. They're an excellent source. They've really exploded in popularity over the past five
Yes.
10 years, and they're all
Um,
over. And they have excellent reviews. So that's really how I originally found out about them. I have a lot of guys in the industry who have told me, Steve, Para Pharma is a great brand. You should try them out. And I said, okay, let me try it out. And I tried them out, and I was like, wow, this is good stuff. Their orals, their injectables are fantastic. So all these steroids that we talked about are really good from Para Pharma, and professional bodybuilders use them for a reason. So touch
let,
upon
let
that,
me
buddy.
let
Yeah.
me two things to finish out the show, guys. Number one, associated with Para Pharma. Here's a motivational thought for you guys. If you got a source that produces great products like Para Pharma, and you know that you're going to get gains, you know you're going to get cut, you know you're going to get muscular. If you put the work in the gym and with your knife and fork, when it comes to sitting down eating food, and Para Pharma almost guarantees you those results, that's motivating right fucking there. If you do the mild stacks and the mild suggestions that we talked about, rather than going crazy dosages, or for the super anabolic type PEDs that Para Pharma does include in their range, then the gains are more capable. And having more capable gains is less of a head fuck. It's less demotivating. One last tip for you guys, and I think this applies, and Para Pharma will support this too. Come onto the forums. Come onto the forums. We will show you you're still in good shape. We will give you these ideas to change things around. We will talk about things outside of the gym, which are kind of sometimes more fucking important. Steve said it right at the beginning of the show. Actual real life shit. People that have come off alcohol, people that have come off drugs, people that are dealing with a death in their family right fucking now. And the only thing that's keeping them probably sane is going to the gym. And these things will help you. And then when it comes to you being focused, when it comes to your training, when it comes to your PED choices, including Para Pharma, we're going to be there for you. You'd be surprised. The community can be incredibly supportive in this particular regards. And having that kind of support that perhaps you can't talk about to your buddies or at the gym, you're having a shit day, you've looked in the mirror, you can't see what we can see, but we go, hang on, I'm still seeing veins, I'm still seeing shape, you're still killing it in the gym, your food still fucking looks good, get the fuck back in the gym, motherfucker. Or I'll come over to wherever the fuck you live and put my foot up your ass. And I say that in the nicest possible way, Steve, purely and simply to keep people focused and keep them motivated and to remind them that they're still doing epic shit. And that's the kind of stuff that we like. That's what we do on the forums. That's what Para Pharma wants us to do for you. And Para Pharma will help you with those journeys too. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.